Divine music, 1, 2, 3, go.
Hey, can I talk to you about my friend named Jesus?
Hey, GP.
Hey, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Hey, welcome to Questions with Timo. I'm Jay, and sitting next to me is Timotheus. Good to have you here again.
Thank you, sir.
And this is episode 2 of this, and I had a blast in the first one. I'm like, this could be a cool thing to do. So I was anxious to see if we would get any real questions.
Yeah.
We got them. We got
We
some
did.
good stupid questions, so don't send me stupid questions. Give us the good ones. But we do have a good question for today.
This is a good question.
All right, so here's the question. It was given in the box in the back. To Timotheus, it says, Jay said that he wasn't 100% sure that all babies or young children go to heaven or not when they die. What do you think? So, baby dies, doesn't have a chance of hearing the gospel. Where does it go?
You know, when this thing first started, I didn't know questions would be this difficult. But I thought they were going to ask me stuff like, what's your favorite sports team and why? This is a tough one because, you know, if we are to live as bibliocentrically, if that's a word, as we can, like look in the light of Scripture as much as we can, there is no biblical answer for this question. People hint at it, people guess at it, people say, yes, all babies go to heaven, but I think that's because they cannot wrap their minds around a God who would, if we follow the Bible to the letter, and we say exactly what Scripture says, that all are born in sin, then it would be, if we follow Scripture to the letter, right to say that baby's lost. But as we follow Scripture to the letter, we begin to ask that question, okay, how does a loving God do that? And so throughout the centuries, tons and tons of people have wrestled with that question. And as people have wrestled, people have looked at different parts of Scripture, but the one Scripture that a lot of people look at, and let me be quick, there is no biblical answer. But this is the text that people look at and have a bunch of questions about. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 12. The context is that David has slept with Bathsheba, killed Uriah. David hears from Nathan that God is going to kill his child because of his own disobedience. And so in verse 23 of chapter 12, actually in verse 22, his people come to him and they ask him why he is not fasting anymore, because he stops fasting. He is fasting and praying for his child, and then he stops fasting. And so David answers them, while the child was still living, I fasted and I wept. I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he's dead, why should I fast? I cannot bring him back. Or actually, he asked the question, can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. And so when he says this, I will go to him, he will not return to me, a lot of people look at that and say, okay, David was a believer. We know that David was going to enter God's presence when he died. He was going to go to heaven. And so how is David saying this? Is David just saying this, you know, kind of sarcastically saying, look, man, I'm going to die. He's already dead. I'm going to die, so I don't need to fast because I'm going to die too. And there's nothing I can do now. Or is David consoled by the reality that in God's love and his sovereignty, he's going to make provision for that child? And so it's the way that you answer that question that will somewhat shape the way that you theologically answer that question. Those who lean on the side that David is being sarcastic are few and far between. I've never really met a person who says that. But all of those who say that David was receiving consolation from that, then look at verse 24 for context, because the Scripture says that he says, I will go to him, but he will not return to me. Then, in verse 24, David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and he lay with her. And so there are a lot who will use that and say, in context, David was comforted, consoled by some reality that this baby, though dead, God is making provision. But if we look through the rest of the Scripture, we have no reason to say that. And it even raises more questions, like what about, there are people who have then since talked about the age of accountability or the age of understanding. The age of reason is what some people call it, and they look at Jewish culture and say, there's a certain age where a child reaches the point of where they know the difference between right and wrong. And at that point, that child is accountable. At that point, that child can reason. What's hard about that is biblically, we don't necessarily see that. Two, what about those who are mentally ill or mentally handicapped? What about those whose brains don't fully develop even? What about Down syndrome people? What about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You can name tons and tons of people who might fit into that category. So at the end of the day, I don't know. But as I look at Scripture and I want to live bibliocentrically, what I do, a lot like you, Jay, is I say God is sovereign, that God knows exactly what He's going to do, that if it is reality that those babies are lost, that God knows exactly what that means. If it is reality that some of them were elected before the foundations of the world, some of them would have been lost anyway, God knows that and has made provision for that. So at the end of the day, that's what I lean on.
Yeah. There you have it. That's Timo's answer. So if you have a question for Timotheus, make sure you go in the back at the welcome table, write it down on the little 3x5 card, drop it in the box, and we will try to get an answer from Timo.
That was a great question. That was a great question. Keep them coming.
All right, back to Crossroads.
I need you to greet the saints.